Welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. Welcome back to New York Buddha Dharma. So tonight we're continuing on with the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma, Volume 1, and we're up to chapters 27 and 28. And this is pretty basic meditation instruction, especially chapter 27. It's all about labeling thoughts, and which you can do or not. But the idea is that when we're thinking, we notice that we're thinking, and we acknowledge those thoughts. You don't just sort of blow them away, you actually sort of see them and appreciate them for what they are, some aspect of your personality. And then you let them go. And you return to the fundamental awareness, which is, depends on what your style of meditation practice, but for us here, most of us, it's returning to the simple awareness of this basic space that we're in this present moment. The instruction is, don't dwell on the past, don't dwell on the present, and don't anticipate the future. Just rest here, now, in this space of this present time. And it's very helpful then to know when you've become lost in thought, mental events of all kinds. By thought, of course, we mean anything, any movement of mind. It could even be the thought, I need to go back to my meditation, I've been thinking, or something like that, some primitive version of that, some little urge to push yourself back. That's a thought too. Much less discursive thoughts, what's for dinner, I'm angry at this person, which is an emotion, as well as an intellectual content. And all of that, we see that, and we see it as the figure against the ground of our ongoing awareness. This ongoing awareness that we can never stop. We're always aware of the space and the time and the passing of the six knowables as they arise. Objects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mental events. But we get fixated on a thought, and then we realize that we become fixated. We go off into dream when we do that. And the instant we realize that we're dreaming, we're not. And there's really nothing else to do. There's no further action required. It just evaporates, the thought, as soon as you see it. There are really only two modalities of thought. Either you're in them, or you're not. When you're in them, you're thinking, oh, that son of a gun, they shouldn't have said that to me, and I'm going to do this, and oh, I'm worried about the rent, and blah, 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 and you're totally absorbed in the dream. And then you realize, oh, I'm thinking. And at that second, you are no longer in it. You've awakened. And you don't have to do anything. You're back here in this space of this present moment, and you can let that go and come back to this. And really, it's a matter of beginning to realize who we really are. That we tend in the beginning to think we are our thoughts. I am this person who's got this problem and needs to solve this and do that and all that. And then we begin to realize that more fundamentally, we are this in the present moment, which is everything that we perceive, the six knowables arising and passing away in the present. And above all, we don't exercise in meditation practice judgment regarding ourselves as good and bad. Those are just other thoughts. You let those go. Those are sort of sneaky thoughts. They're seductive thoughts. I'm good, I'm bad, that person's good, this is bad. I'm reminded of that line from the sadhana of Mahamudra, which I know many people here probably know, are well familiar with. It says, good and bad, happy and sad, all thoughts vanish into emptiness, which is this space that we're in here, like the imprint of a bird in the sky. It's beautiful, and it's true. As soon as you bring awareness to it, that's what they do. They vanish into this space, like the imprint of a bird in the sky. So we're constantly returning from dreaming to awareness. That's the practice. Trungpa says if we sit and we're aware, of our minds and the space of the present moment, 80% of the time, that's good. 20% of the time. Yeah, 20%. 80% we're lost in thought. And he said, that's very good. Because thought is so seductive. But over time, we are shifting our allegiance from those past and future-oriented thoughts, full of anxiety, hope and fear, judgment, good and bad, to this. And this is the true nature of who we really are. This is where all the Buddha fields and the Buddha families lie. It's only in this present moment, which is not all about I and other and our dramas. Any comments, complaints, questions, revisions, additions? We got a bunch of very experienced meditators here. Huh?
When you first said 80%, I was kind of shocked.
Yeah, really.
It's interesting that you did that.
It is. Well, you see, I've been reading Our Pristine Mind, Organ Chögyam, and he says, and I was shocked, he says, when you get to the point where you can rest in pristine mind, which is, what that really is originally pure mind, kadak, original purity, rigpa. Yeah, kadakpe rigpa. So it's the mind of original purity. He's translating it as pristine mind, which is
Pristine awareness.
Pristine awareness. Mm-hmm. And what he says, he said, and I swear this is in the book, he said, when you can rest in there for 30 minutes, then you're getting somewhere. And so we should all be able to do that for 30 minutes, just rest in this natural, uncontrived awareness. For me, if I can just come back to it, 20% of the time I'm doing well. Although it's very hard to measure, don't you think? Because your thoughts are so much the foreground. You tend to notice them much more.
Recently, I went to visit Khenpo Chögyam Rinpoche in Kathmandu, Nepal, and he's living in his nunnery, and right next to the nunnery there's a guest house. So I was staying in the guest house, and I was up on the fourth floor, up on the balcony, and I looked down to where his rooms are in the nunnery, and he was just sitting on his terrace, looking out. So I'm looking down, I see him, and then he looks up at me and he waves. So and he's just sitting there looking out. So then I put a chair over, and I sat and looked out, and we were both sitting together. He on his balcony, and me on my balcony. And it was just so very natural and very simple.
So, in the next chapter, he talks about touch and go. And he starts out by saying what makes mindfulness possible is mind's awareness of itself. The term for that in Tibetan is rang rig. Again, it's self-awareness, rigpa, awareness, or whatever you want to call it, knowledge, non-dual knowledge. Rigpa is the Tibetan for vidya in Sanskrit. Again, Vidyadhara, right? The holder of wisdom, holder of seeing, true seeing. And then Rang is the word for self. So what makes it possible is that this fundamental knowingness that we all have is self-knowing. We don't have to have a subject or an object. It just automatically knows itself. Like we know that we're awake right now, each one of us. We're not asleep. We're not lost in dreams. I don't see anybody dreaming too much. And that's wrong rig. We know it. He says, mindfulness is based on a sense of being and individuality. That is, when we come back into this present moment, there's a sense of really being present here, and that each one of us is we know who we are, right? We're this individual person. We don't have to think about it even. It's not a matter of judgment or thought. It just presents itself automatically. And you touch and go. He says you touch or contact the experience of actually being here, and then you let go. You see, when you touch it, when you say, yes, I'm here, that's really a mental event. That's a thought, of one kind or another. And then you let it go. And when you let go, there's just this, without any comment. So he says the technique that we talked about last week, I really like this. He said this is almost like a mantra or an instruction that you can give yourself. Breathe out, dissolve into the space, and gap. He says gap. I prefer pause. You breathe out, dissolve, and then there's a pause. Stop doing anything. And then there's the breathe out, dissolve, the breath dissolves, and the pause. That's touch and go. The touch is the sense of existence, that you are who you are. You have a sense that you are there and you are sitting. The go part is that you do not hang on to that. You do not sustain your sense of being, but you let go of it. Right at the end of the out-breath, if you're working with the out-breath, you just let go for a second. And then the breath goes out again. Out, breathe out, dissolve, let go. He says you touch and you intentionally disown the experience so you don't bottle things up in yourself. If we're holding on to it, we're sort of counting, if we count the breaths, for instance, it's like you're bottling it up. I've got 100 breaths that I've counted right now. And, it's like you've got it bottled inside you. In this technique, you just touch the breath, you go out, and you let go. Dissolve and let go. He says, in touch and go, there is a sense of individuality, of personhood. It's me. You are actually here. You exist, he says. And then he says, you might be worried about egolessness and egohood, the teachings of egolessness and egohood when you hear this. Let the Guru and the Sangha take care of that. Let go of worries about the future, he says. And then it's very simple. When thoughts of the past, present, or future arise in our shamatha practice, you could experience them, look at them, and then come back to the breath. He says, avoiding problems is itself a problem. It is a kind of spiritual materialism. You want to have your meditation be perfect. Avoid any problems. Bottling up your problems and keeping them as a family heirloom. Your greatest problem is not that you are an aggressive or a lusty person. The problem is that you would like to bottle those things up and put them aside. You have become an expert in deception. It's like, we have these opinions about who we are, these thoughts about I am this kind of a person, I am that kind of a person, I have this virtue and that failing. And we hold on to these things. And we don't tell anybody about them, especially the bad things. But even the good things we tend to keep pretty private. He says, so you should experience your aggressive thoughts. Look at them. This doesn't mean that you will act on them or execute your aggression. When you do act, unless you have looked at such thoughts, your aggressive thoughts, when they come up in your mind, as you're sitting and meditating, you can see that there is aggression there. And if you haven't done that, notice that, you will not act properly. However, if you look at your aggressive thoughts, you do not usually put them into practice, and they dwindle. Comments?
So they just take care of themselves.
They do. The more that you look at them, and in looking, do nothing with them, and then they just evaporate like any other thought. And more, we learn how to relax into this open, clear, present awareness. And that brings softness, non-aggression, compassion, gentleness, non-judgment, all of that. We're shifting our allegiance from all the things that we think to coming back and being real, really. It's the only path. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. A lot of what I'm saying is coming from Organ Chögyam, our pristine mind. He's very, very clear.
I like maybe combining two things that you have said. One is the idea that we function of ego is like when we talk about I'm the kind of person who and then whatever the trait is, whatever the thing is, like I'm the kind of person who is nice. I'm a nice person. I'm this person. I'm that person. Like anything that you come up with, and you're like combining that with, Chögyam Trungpa's saying that ego is a lie, right? So I feel like a great exercise for people is to come up with 5 things that answer the question. I'm the type of person who, and then have everybody go through them, and then tell everyone that they're all lying to themselves. That everything that you just said is a lie. I don't know how people would react to that, but I feel like that would be a great exercise.
Wow.
for large groups of people who don't understand ego yet.
And I think a lot of what people would say about who they are would be very negative. We're so self-attacking, especially in the West.
That's interesting. I hadn't even thought about whatever about a
At least if we're talking to ourselves, we might say very negative things about who we are, you know? Be more honest about our negativity. Francesca, right? No. Isabel.
I always had trouble to say how I am and who I am. Like, you know, when you have to fill out profiles, whatever, like for dating sites, or when they ask you in interviews, you know, like I always had like I didn't know what to say.
But I'll bet you have feelings about yourself to yourself.
Yeah.
About who you are and what your prospects are and
No, definitely, but you know, not so clean cut. Like, you know, some people there.
if we need batteries, I've got some in this bag here. If you don't have, sure, you can try them. Sorry.
But I think when you're so solid about this and this and this, that you become it. You become when you say I'm this, I'm like that, you know, I'm good at this, I'm bad at that. Then you become that, and you can't change anymore. You kind of lock yourself into that characteristic that you build yourself into something. You know?
I think that those things, though, that you tell yourself you are, you know, I'm smart, I'm not smart, I'm, you know, attractive, I'm not attractive, you know, whatever it might be, that they all dissolve when you come back into awareness of the present moment. And that they only live in thoughts. Yeah. And in thoughts, we build this portrait of ourselves willy-nilly, you know, without even trying, really. Okay, you're going to find them there? Yeah. I mean, that's one of the problems with thought, is that we think that's who we are.
Or we repeat what we were told by our parents.
Well, I think most of our thoughts come from outside, that we've been taught them, that content. Maybe even all. You know, and our parents are certainly one of the biggest sources. Right, you hear them in your ear. Right. Right. There's a word for that in psychoanalysis. They call that introjects. That it's like somebody injected you, you know, with ideas about yourself and the world, and they're not really you. They're just imports, and you think they're you, and even especially the negative things about yourself. Yeah. In coaching, one of the coach's jobs is to identify the client's saboteur. We all carry around a saboteur. The saboteur is the one who attacks us. The saboteur is the voice inside that says, don't even try that, you're going to fail. Nobody's going to like you, you know. You're too this, you're too that. You know, you're just what your mother said you would be, you know, a failure, unattractive, whatever it might be. And that's what the saboteur does. And if the saboteur had its way, what it does is it stops you. It slows you down. You could come to a complete halt, you know. Never try anything. You wouldn't go, don't go to that party. They won't like you. Don't make that speech. They'll boo you off the stage. They'll think you're an idiot, you know, whatever it might be. And if the saboteur really had its way, you might kill yourself even, leave this world. And the whole thing about the saboteur is that it's not really you. It's voices that you've learned from different sources. The parents are the biggest possibility. Not necessarily, but like most obvious choice. And then there is your peer group, people who have, you know, told you things about yourself as you grew up, you know. When I was a little kid, I was always picked last for kickball when I was 7, you know, in 2nd grade. And it had a huge effect on me throughout my life. You know, as a result, I worked very hard in athletics through high school and college, you know, and even after. And I think I was compensating for being the last kid picked, you know, the feeling of what that was like. So we all carry these things around. and they're interjects. And in fact, one of the exercises you might give a client is to create a portrait of their saboteur, sometimes called the gremlin. And some people will draw it, and some people will put it in words. And you can find your saboteur. I had one client, a Russian woman, whose saboteur was her Russian aunt, and she gave it her aunt's name. I forget what it was, Irina or something like that. And because that's what she felt, the voice that she heard inside her, that it was her aunt's voice telling her, "You're terrible. You're never going to be a success. And nobody will like you," whatever it was. So I think that those voices are most often negative, although sometimes they're pretty self-congratulatory too. And even then, they have a kind of stale quality to them, as though we're praising ourselves for things that we don't quite do it for us. So the whole thing, as Our Pristine Mind, that book says, is to realize that this identity that you've got in your thoughts is not you. What is you is the pristine mind, which includes all of this in the present moment. That's the true self, if there really, you can't even call it a self. There's no I or other in it.
I think the Rinpoche said when he was dying, he said, "In spite of everything, I still feel good about myself."
In spite of everything, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard the Tibetans look on Westerners, like Americans, and think that they've got an unusual amount of self-hatred.
Yeah. The other day, someone from the Sangha reminded me we were on retreat, and he was like offering, the night before, offering the incense or whatever that we had burnt. He went out in the field and offered it, and the whole field caught on fire. Because he thought, the charcoal or the incense was, cold. And he said, it was pretty embarrassing. So I said, when things like that happen, I'm always grateful that someone else did that and I didn't.
But inevitably there'll be one that you do.
because it's very easy for me to forgive and have sympathy or understanding for others. But when I do things like that, then I go into a dark place for months and just feel so horrible that I could have done anything. Like, I was so humiliated that I never really forgive myself for these things. So I'm always happy if someone else does it, so I don't have to go through that deep mourning, self, deprecation.
Isabel.
Yeah, I think those thoughts are really not the problem. I think us clinging to those thoughts, that's the problem. Like, if you hold on to it, and that is ego, right? In a way, it's like I'm the piece of shit that the world revolves around, kind of thing. And that's why I think the Tibetans, they don't have it that much, because they cling less. They have less clinging, maybe. I don't know.
Trungpa Rinpoche said of Tibetans that they have a kind of primitive sanity that Americans lack. And he said it's a naive sanity. That's the word he used, naive. And the reason is that the Tibetan people, anyhow, were so consumed by the problem of survival, of taking care of their flocks and their kids and growing some, plant food and just surviving in that terrible terrain, the difficult terrain, under primitive conditions, that they didn't have time to be as neurotic and as Americans have. And he said, Americans, he said that they have so much time and leisure that they can get much more neurotic, but they also gives them much more time to practice the Dharma. Well, maybe that's why we're neurotic, because we're so busy. Yeah. Carrie.
Is there, like, a lot of the practices talks, just deals with ego and sort of breaking down the ego, deconstructing it to some degree, right? I know that the view is sort of ego is a mistake of consciousness of some sort, but is there any particular books or readings or explanation for the formation of ego, of why it forms, that you feel are particularly good, or that you could?
Well, I mean, there's lots, and I think first the thought that comes to mind is the chapter in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism on the development of ego. It's on the 5 skandhas. That's the picture of the development of ego, is how the 5 skandhas develop. And there are other readings. I mean, I could go find them. For instance, in the complete works of Chögyam Trungpa, where he describes the development of ego through the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th skandha, and then how one begins to unravel it backwards, from the 5th skandha on down. In the texts, this is often called the origin of ego. Is often called Trungpa. Trungpa is the Tibetan word for it, which is often translated as ignorance, but is more accurately translated as error. And especially if you read the Yogacara texts, where they describe the development of error very precisely, and what they say is that it's almost magical, that in the middle of all this space, suddenly something concretizes. There's a figure that emerges, and it creates a figure ground. So suddenly there's a person, and everything else recedes and becomes less important because it's the ground. It's like if you draw a picture of a person on a piece of paper, and you ask somebody what this is a picture of, they'll say it's a picture of a person. They don't say it's a picture of space, because they focus on the figure. So that what happens is that there is a thatness that occurs, and everything else fades into ground. Now that presence out there, somewhere in space, implies the perceiver here. It implies a perceiver of it. If that's there, then the seer of it must be here. Now that is just an implication. It's an induction, type of reasoning. If that's there, then this must be here. You never find the perceiver. If you think you found the perceiver and you're looking at it, then who's looking? Another perceiver. It's like an infinite regression. You can never find the seer because there's always a seer seeing the seer. It's an infinite regress. Reminds me of in Greek logic, there's a thing called Zeno's paradox, and it's a silly thing, but if you fire an arrow to a target and it continually goes half the remaining distance to the target and never arrives, it's kind of, but this one's real. There is no perceiver. You can't find it. It's just an implication, and the implication is like a journey. If that's there, then I am here. But that's a statement. And that statement has a life. It only lives as long as it's being made, and then silence, and the whole thing disappears. So it knows that it's going to die. That is what in the teachings is called the primordial fear. It's the fear that drives ego, the fear that I has to be sustained or it'll disappear. And so the 2nd skandha is born. This implied perceiver wants a relationship with what's perceived, and it reaches out to feel the quality of it. Is it for me, against me, or indifferent? And that's the second skandha of feeling. And then that goes back and forth until you get the fully developed ego. The third skandha is interesting. It's like the second skandha is that the perceiver reaches out to feel the quality of it. The third skandha is that the information comes back, and based on that, you push, pull, or stay indifferent to that object. If you think it's for you, you want to pull it to you. If you think it's against you, you want to push it away. And if it has no, position, then you just are indifferent. This is the level at which a child, an infant, is born, at the level of the third skandha. That's where they're operating. They're operating on the push-pull of the third skandha, completely. They haven't developed any, in the fourth skandha yet, is concept. It's to label things. It's like, so you're going to push-pull, and you learn that milk is to be desired, and mommy is the provider of the milk. So the first word that a baby learns, maybe, is mama, and then milk. These are the first words. You'll see. They really, those are the first, aren't they? Those are the first words. And it's because the necessity of organizing this push-pull in a more utilitarian and useful way, so that you always know the hot stove is hot, it's dangerous, and the child learns the word hot as they look at the stove. And they begin to develop vocabulary. That takes place much later after birth, months and months after, when they begin to develop these conceptual categories. How soon do you think a child gets its first word? 3 months? Somewhere around there? Can you remember? I can't remember. Later even? Later? And then it complicates further and further. And the Tibetans say that the ego, all the way through the fifth skandha, isn't fully formed until the child reaches the age of around 9. And so they don't want to set a child to meditating, because meditation is the undoing of ego. It's sort of working backwards and unraveling it, going back to the source. And you don't want to do that until it's fully formed, or you can actually damage a person. But you can read where else? Wait a minute. There are other places. I'll give you a few next week. But cutting through, if you have it, development of ego.
Pretty much says it all. Yeah.
Does it say it all there? Yeah. He said a grain of sand sticks up its head. But they call it error. It's really interesting that the error is that initial error of the concretization of a form in space, so separating out, and that instantly implies a perceiver here of the figure against the ground. And that is Trungpa, error. I wonder what the Sanskrit is for that. Most often in text, though, I see it translated as ignorance. The birth of ignorance.
I read something in the Shambhala Sun once that I really liked, sort of along those lines, and it said that humans are, or sentient, like self-aware beings, are the universe's, might be the universe's attempt to wake itself up.
Say that again?
So humans are the universe's attempt
to wake itself
up. And if you think about it, right? And so talking about like a grain of sand sticking its head up, and also if you recognize that we are indeed all part of the same universe, then how would the universe wake itself up if that were possible?
Yeah.
Maybe through attempts like us.
I mean, the truth is that thing that arises is also the same, right? It's also
the what?
It's also pristine mind. So there is, it's all one and the same thing. So, in order for us to notice that, there has to be some movement, right? So something's got to move. If nothing was moving, if we didn't have appearances, then we wouldn't have an opportunity to wake up.
That's right.
So we always teach that they are, kind of a negative thing because it creates dualism. But if you look at it that way, then they are our teachers and reminders to wake up. And especially when they're very unpleasant, because then they're so present and so vivid.
Yeah. And when they're very unpleasant, they're challenging us to break out of our self-conception, narrow self-definitions. Where I have to be this way, my life has to be this way. There's a Bodhichitta chant that I do. It's from a particular sadhana, and it starts out, it uses the word ignorance, but it's translating the Tibetan. I can see the Tibetan, in this text, and it's translating Trungpa, this word that can also be translated as error, and the birth of ego. And it says, in order that all sentient beings may dissolve temporary confusion, temporary Trungpa, that error. In order that all sentient beings may dissolve temporary confusion. That's the first line of the Bodhichitta. Then it goes on, I vow to rest in Bodhichitta. I vow to cultivate Bodhichitta. Well, maybe we should end. What do you think? Anybody have any burning comments? Joshua, nothing? Okay.
Dot in space.
Huh?
Dot in space.
A dot in space. All right. Well, shall we do the dedication of merit? Wait, we only have two? I'll print some up at home. Oh, we're going to offer the tea. We have tea. Oh, okay. Can you carry? Thank you. And we just hope that nobody's walking beneath it. Thank you. What did he say?
There's outdoor. There's a rock area. You do it on this side. There's like a rock area. Somebody's living space.
Assemblies of oceans of Samaya bound, accept this offering gift of Dharma. May we yogins with our disciples obtain lordship, freedom from disease, long life, glory, fame, good fortune, and all great and vast enjoyments. Grant us the cities of the pacifying and enriching actions, and so on. Samaya holders, guard us, support us with all the cities. May there be no untimely death, illness, stuns, or obstructing spirits for us. May we have no nightmares, ill omens, or bad dealings. May the world enjoy peace, have good harvests, abundant grain, expansion of Dharma, and glorious auspiciousness. Accomplish whatever mind desires. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.